All right. Coming up, Jaqui Lane, letter from Australia. Actually, she's there now. Jack, welcome to the show.
Right,
What's the weather
thank
like in
you.
Sydney?
Well, it's crisp, I think you would call it, and
Is that
but
crisp for
mostly
Sydney
sunny.
or crisp for New Zealand?
Oh, for Sydney. So
Mm.
it's Sydney. It's going down to like 8 at night, which is
Oh,
cold here, and
mm.
only about 12 or 15 during the day, which is cold. Everyone's panicking, wearing 5 layers of puffer jackets, and you know,
I'll tell you what, we regard that as subtropical here, I have to say, just at the moment. Good on you.
yes,
Listen, I have been watching, and we'll talk obviously about the sensational over there in a second, but the big story, it seems to me, coming out this week is that the Americans are going to review AUKUS. And this has prompted sort of panic. Panic, is panic the right word? In political quarters, particularly in Canberra, because they're now seeing the foundation of Australia's security and defence network start to fray and potentially fall away. Have I overemphasised that?
I probably. I think the initial news, the initial thinking was, "Holy hell!" He's going to pull out of it or do something with it. I think the calmer heads now have just said, "Look, America actually gains quite a lot out of AUKUS, and it's just a part of Trump's deal making. He'll probably want, probably want Australia to stump up more money and move more stuff to America, and it's part of a typical Trump ploy. Um, Albo's meant to be meeting Trump on the sides of the G7 conference because Australia's been invited to that, but as he gets on a plane today, they still don't know whether he's going to have a meeting. So I think it's Trump being Trump and just, creating a bit of havoc to see if he can get a better position.
Yeah, they're fairly, I have to say, they're pretty effective negotiating tactics if the last few
Yeah,
months have been any indication.
yeah.
But is Australia desperate to stay in AUKUS? I mean, has he got you over the barrel in the sense that he knows that you don't want to leave?
Oh, look, I think so because really, in relation to the submarines, we've got no capacity to build them. That's why we originally went with we were looking at the French ones, and of course we backed, we dudded the French and then changed our mind and went with the American offer. So we've kind of committed to the Americans, and it's something like 330 billion over 20, 30 years, so it's a long-term thing. And we've got no real capacity to build anything here without them, really. I mean, we could always go back to the French if they'd have us, or the Germans, but I think our defence capability is pretty much hooked into America one way or the other.
Yeah, because you've been making a great play. I mean, it's the really interesting thing from my point of view is on the issue of defence. Both the liberal left and the centre right tend to agree as to Australia's role, don't they?
Yeah, pretty much.
And that
And
is that
and
you
the re-
are
yeah,
a primary bulwark against the rise of China, and
correct.
have been derided in the past as being basically the United States deputy in the Asia Pacific region. Is that still true?
Look, I think that's changing to a degree, given particularly Trump's really not trying to get out of the Pacific totally, but he's got other priorities. Australia really has developed strong links with Japan and India in relation to military and defence. So I think the Australian position has changed somewhat. I mean, we've still got intelligence facilities here like Pine Gap in Queensland. Quite a lot of American personnel rotate through Northern Territory. So there's a strong, long-standing commitment, um, but I think Australia is developing, independent kind of connections with Japan and India and others around the Pacific, because all the countries recognise that each of us have a role in protecting the freedom of movement around the Asia Pacific.
I read a story. I think somebody's just said, "Oh, you've got Trump derangement syndrome," in response to what you've just said already. So you've obviously set somebody off already, Jack. But I read a story. I think it was in the Sydney Morning Herald. It was yesterday about the perceptions that the overall perceptions of Donald Trump, and it was done by an international polling agency called Pew Research, and how the US image is in a variety of countries, including Australia, since Donald Trump had become president. And the way it was reported, I think, in the Sydney Morning Herald, was that Australia was one of the countries, one of three, I think, who had the most unfavourable rating and ranking of or perception of Donald Trump in particular. First of all, just on that issue, does that seem right to you? That I think it ran about sort of 3-1 against him.
Yeah, I would say so. I think most Australians would think that we've got we have good trade relations and have always supported America, certainly from a military capacity. Australians, New Zealanders and Australians sent people off to Vietnam when a lot of other countries didn't. We've been a strong supporter of America through international institutions and over decades. And trade-wise, we've really got, mostly we typically have a deficit with America, so it doesn't make sense to really slap any additional tariffs on Australia. So I think the capriciousness, I think, of Trump just kind of, I think more than anything, I think Australians don't not appreciate it, but it just see it as capricious and not typically not really based on fact.
Mm. And
So
in that same poll, the really interesting thing was there's a second question asked. Do people see the United States of America or China as the top global economy? Now, I don't know if that was reported in the Sydney Morning Herald or not. I've gone to look at the Pew Research
yeah,
Centre. And Australia, half of Australians think that China is the strongest and world's leading economic power. Only a third of Australians think that the United States is. What does that tell you?
well, it tells you that our standard of living is largely funded by China. The
Mm.
our the quantity of resources that we ship to China. So I think that's a direct relation to our trading situation with China. Large Chinese community here, have been since almost the beginning, and I guess we see the Asia Pacific, China, as well as real part of our future. So it doesn't surprise me.
Although, I mean,
Um,
it's not true, but it's just
yeah,
it's the perception, I guess, and that's what's being
absolutely,
tested here. Yeah,
absolutely.
and that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and which is
Okay.
why it's a challenge for Australia, because we kind of our economy and our standard of living has been really, China has been a large part of that, yet we're a deeply strong ally of America. So when your two best friends are having a fight, it's being in the middle's a tough place to be.
The difference is, though, that you fought with the trenches with the United States of America for over 100 years. The Americans
Yeah,
saved Australia from Japan imperialism in the Second World War. Um, so there's history there. You've been in the trenches. You haven't been in
yeah,
any
literally.
trenches with China. It's very much a relationship of commercial of
Yeah,
need, isn't it? Really, than anything else. There's no
yeah,
cultural
but
background there.
no, but again, and I've said it many times, Australia's standard of living in the last 30 years has been largely on the back of Chinese growth,
Mm,
and you can't ignore that. You
mm,
can, I mean, think of, 4 or 5 years ago, China put huge locks on Australian wine and meat and wheat and stuff, and that was a significant issue for Australia,
Yeah, that
and
was
a
a
lot of
shocker,
those
right,
have
to
now
you, wasn't
come
it?
off. Yeah, so they are important commercially for Australia.
All right. Listen, now the other two issues that have been dominating media coverage on the other side of the Tasman, obviously there's the end of the mushroom case. Extraordinary. The woman who's accused of poisoning three of her in-laws and trying to kill basically anybody that yeah, got in her way. She's been in the she was in the court. I think she was on the stand for 8 days. Is that right? Have I got that right?